lots of families that have that battle to do homework, and they'll talk quite a lot around that's the worst part of our week. They won't come and sit down. It ends in tears. Everybody's crying. There's a big row. It impacts the evening.
Hello and welcome once again to No Running in the Corridors, the rebel podcast that asks which school rules are actually worth breaking. My name is Helen Mulley, and in each episode I'm joined by two experienced voices from different parts of the education world to take a familiar rule, hold it up to the light and ask whether it still makes sense. And joining me in my soundproofed secret meeting room for this episode are Katie Alexander, Deputy Head Teacher at Carr Mill Primary School with particular responsibility for pastoral support and inclusion. Hello, Katie. Nice to have you.
Good morning. Lovely to be here.
And we also have Darren Lyon, an experienced school principal and improvement partner who's now researching education at doctoral level.
Hello, good morning. Nice to be here.
Okay, I'll reveal which rule we're going to explore in a moment. But before we get into the detail, I do always like to start with a quick warm-up question to help us to get to know each other and perhaps find out just how rebellious our conversation is likely to get. So, I want you both to be honest with me. In your own life, are you instinctively a rule follower or a rule breaker? And I am going to come to the Deputy Head Teacher first, Katie.
Well, I think I am your typical eldest child. So I was a strict stickler for the rules when I was younger. Always did as I was told. Never had a detention when I was at high school. But I'm very bossy with it. So particularly with my little brother, I would always find those times when he wasn't following the rules, because there was lots of those, and make sure I told on him. So I think that's probably why I ended up doing the job that I do.
That's about perfect. Darren, how about you?
Right, I'm going to be a bit off-piste straight away and just say I think I'm a rule challenger. So rather than a rule breaker, I kind of like to challenge rules, and I always have. At school, that used to get me into bother because I used to go into places we weren't supposed to go into for no apparent reason. The sixth form had a drinks machine when I was at school. It was the only drinks machine in the school. So I used to sneak into sixth form when I was in fifth form just to do that. Those kind of things. Very petty. But if I couldn't see sense to a rule, I'd always challenge it.
Oh, that bodes very well for the conversation we're about to have, I have to say. So, without further ado, let's bring this rule out into the open. And it's simply this. Homework must be handed in on time. I reckon few school expectations feel as obvious as this one. In a way, do the work, hand it in on time. It sounds reasonable. Character building, even. Perhaps it's a preparation for life beyond school where you have to show up and do the thing and get it done on time. But I'm interested in what happens when this simple rule collides with real life. So let's start with the picture as it is. Katie, talk to me about the homework situation in your school. How does it work?
Yeah, so we're taking children, aren't we, from their very earliest years. We have a nursery at our school right through to year 6 when we're preparing them for the world of high school. So homework looks very different, at different points throughout their journey with us in a school. So very youngest children, probably through to the end of Key Stage 1. There's an expectation to do a little bit of reading at home every week, a little bit of interactive maths every week. That then continues through into the junior year groups. The expectations don't really change. It's still reading and a little bit of maybe times tables, arithmetic recall. But the expectations perhaps shift as children move into the junior years in terms of handing homework in on time, which is, I guess, what we're talking about today.
Okay. And does the implementation of that policy, such as it is, does that vary between teachers? Do teachers have autonomy in what they set, when they set it, and when it has to be done?
The policy in general is relatively consistent. The changes come probably less on a teacher-to-teacher basis, more on a child-to-child basis. So we know there might be some children who struggle to do homework in the traditional sense, and there's adaptations made around those children. There might be families for one reason or another that are struggling with homework for that period of time. And again, adaptations would be made there. So more child specific, I would say, than teacher specific. But the teachers lead that bespoke kind of package around the children. And you know what? I think that's a real strength at our school. We know our children and our families inside and out. And when it comes to things like homework, that's where you really kind of see the benefits of those relationships.
Definitely. And so just pushing this a little bit further, let's say you have a child and there's no reason that you are aware of why the homework shouldn't have been completed that week. They genuinely just couldn't be bothered or had something more interesting to do. What happens then in terms of consequences or even sanctions?
We believe really that when children are very young, it's not necessarily always the children's fault that homework necessarily hasn't been completed. In the first instance, regardless of age, it's a conversation with home. You know, we've noticed the last couple of weeks homework hasn't, quite been done. Is there anything that's stopping that from happening? Is there anything we can help with? When the children are in the lower year groups, we don't give consequences for not doing homework. That's not something that we find helpful. As they get older, and certainly as they reach our top years, our year 5s and our year 6s, we've just got to be careful in that shift around expectation to kind of take on learning themselves. But when we talk about a consequence, it's a consequence maybe the second, third, fourth time the homework hasn't come in. And we're talking about enabling them to have 5 minutes maybe at the start of break time for them to catch up with that little bit of reading that they didn't do, rather than a great big, very long-winded consequence.
Right, so it's absolutely linked to what hasn't happened.
In terms of the homework not being finished?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's less about the homework, isn't it, and the task that's been set. And it's more about, especially as they get older, just teaching them that little element of responsibility. This was what we asked you to do. You've had lots of chances, we've spoken about it, and it still isn't done. So today we're going to miss a little tiny bit while we just do some catching up. But that's part of a wider discussion with that child as well. It's never linear, is it? It's always part of a bigger picture, and teaching children those life lessons.
Yeah.
And supporting them, to be able to, certainly when they move to high school, be able to access those expectations and those rules with a steady grounding really, and an understanding of what could happen to them in the future if they don't apply with rules, whether that's homework or wider societal rules in general.
Okay, Darren, I can see you smiling to yourself over there, and I'm going to bring you into this conversation now. Your experience, I think, is mostly secondary, isn't it, rather than primary?
It is.
Do you see the secondary picture as an extension of what Katie was saying? Do you think the landscape really changes when it comes to homework in secondary schools? And should it?
I mean, yeah, it does. I have had some experience of primary. I ran an all-through school for quite a few years.
Oh, okay.
So, and I have to say the primary was always a scary bit because I'd always emerge covered in paint or jam or something. It is a different experience in secondary. I think our primary colleagues put some really valuable stones in place to kind of that we should be able to build from. But however well we try, I think there's some massive leaps in terms of expectation of our young people, particularly around volume of homework. I mean, I've worked in a whole variety of settings and obviously led some settings myself in that area. And you look at, even if we say every subject sets 20 minutes a week, that's usually an hour a night, 5 hours a week. Katie was just saying there about what happens if they miss 3 homeworks. In a secondary school, I would say more than half the kids would miss 3 homeworks in a week. So you'd almost be on that thing. You then perhaps got the volume, and I'm not trying to suggest that secondary is particularly different in this way, but if you look at a secondary maths teacher, I mean, my background's maths teacher, I teach 8 classes a week. I'd be setting homework for each of those 8 classes every week, at least once. In some schools I've worked in, I'd had to set 2 lots of homework. That's 240 bits of homework minimum a week you're marking, potentially 480. Now, we can talk about self-marking, peer assessment, all that kind of stuff, using AI to digitally mark it, which personally I think is great in terms of time saving, but I do feel takes the personal element out of it. And that worries me. Yeah, I just think it's not even just the homework, it's the bit that comes next. So where Katie was saying, in primary, you have that real benefit, and I mean that in a really positive way, that benefit of a lot more interaction with those young people throughout the day and so on. Whereas in secondary, you see them for anything between 40 minutes and an hour, and then they're gone. And kind of within that space, just managing it, you then get into the realms of homework diaries. The bane of my life, every school I've managed and run, I've got rid of homework diaries. So I think they're horrible because they sound really sensible. Oh, let's write our homework down to know what we're doing. And then we add to that, but you've got to have it signed every week so that so we know your parents have seen it. And then we'll use that as a little message between us. But you haven't got it signed, so you get a detention for that. And before you know it, you've got children having multiple detentions for nothing to do with homework. The fact that they didn't manage to get their parents to sign it because they were too busy, or they couldn't be bothered, or they hadn't done the homework and they didn't want their parents to know. It just opens up such a can of worms around punitive attitudes to it. And then immediately, homework is a negative. Before you've done anything else, it's just become a negative by the way that we manage it. And that is... I'm not saying it's wholly secondary, Katie. I'm sure you have issues like that as well, but it is a very big issue in secondary because of those associated things around management of how it's recorded.
That's really interesting. And I think that's pushing us in the direction of what I wanted us to look at next, which is the thorny issue of what homework is actually for. Why are we setting it at all? We have children in school for however many hours a day, however many days a week it is, a big chunk of their time. Why is it, I think a lot of people ask, that they can't do all the work they need to do within those hours? What is the point of homework? Katie, if you could just answer that question for us in, 2 simple sentences, that would be great.
That's something that I've really struggled with, I think, as a teacher, because as a child, I was very busy outside of school, played lots of sport, did lots of activities, and it's something my children still do now. And it's really difficult, isn't it, sometimes to fit that homework in. So I think it's about identifying what's the purpose of the homework. Is the purpose of the homework to carry on the learning? Or is the purpose of the homework to develop those skills of being able to do a task that's been given and be an independent learner? So I think that it's really important there. And that's when I think those bespoke kind of niche homeworks around children can be really important. So for us, it doesn't matter necessarily what the homework is. For some children, it'll be the same. And, 27 of the 30 in the class might all do the same. But for those 3 children that find that hard, for me, it's okay that they do something different, because it's not about the task. It's about being able to sit down with mum and dad and do something together and develop those independent learning habits as they get older.
So it's not making up for something that didn't happen in the classroom. It's in addition to that.
I don't think your formal homework should make up for the classroom. We do give some children little extra tasks, like they might do some phonics flashcards at home, or they might be asked to practice, letter formation or number formation. But I think that's a separate conversation. And I think you've had a conversation with the parent about why you're giving them a little bit of extra work to enable them to maybe catch up with something they're finding difficult. But I think that's very different than that formal weekly set homework.
And what about you, Darren? What do you think homework is for?
I don't know. That's my honest answer. I don't know. I've been doing this 30 years. I don't know. I think I'll give you a couple of anecdotes if you don't mind. I ran a school down south a number of years. It was a brand new school. We opened it from scratch and built it up into all through to sixth form. And because it was new, I kind of let teachers go with instinctively what they thought would be fun and developmental. And we did 2 particular projects that I know they still do now. So if they're listening, they'll know I'm talking about them. One of them was in Year 7 history, where they built a castle. So obviously they do about the Normans and all the rest of it in their history. And they built a castle from anything they wanted. So you'd get students that would come in, they'd have made it from a cake, others would have done it from Lego, whatever. And it was great. And we used to photograph them, put them on Facebook and all the rest of it. It was absolutely brilliant. And in the same school, the science team kind of took that on. And when they were talking about cell development, I think in Year 8, they would do the same thing. So you get children that had come in with plasticine models or cakes. And I thought it was brilliant. And then one parent, we were doing some show production, and one of the parents I was really good friends with just came up to me and go, that science thing you did the other day, it was a nightmare. And I said, why? It's brilliant. He said, I can't cook, I'm rubbish at that kind of thing. And I suddenly had that moment and I thought, oh my God, I've been promoting this, it's really good, I love the outcomes, it's fantastic. And I haven't actually given a second thought the level of inconvenience that's caused to parents, or the trauma that it's caused to families who've kind of looked at what's gone before and thought, oh my God, I can't do that. So that always worried me. And then as a maths teacher, I think Kate is absolutely right. I think you can't cover what's been done or what's not been covered in class at home, certainly in secondary, where parents have a profound fear of maths. You know, the moment you get into year 9, there are very few parents that are comfortable sitting down with their young people and talking about maths. So the idea that they've struggled in class, so we'll send them home with something to have a go at, they obviously will ask their parents, who then get very cross because they're stressed about the fact they can't do it, and then they're not very happy with school and so on. So that to me is out the window. I see a benefit in a bit of repetition of tasks or similar tasks so that students can show that independence. Completely get that. My issue, I suppose, with homework is that there's this notion of a correlation between homework and success. Now, I always turn that on its head and say it's not about children that do their homework are successful. It's successful children do their homework because they can. Now, I have 3 children. They're all grown up now, so they won't mind me talking about them. They all did their homework because I told them it was important, even though I didn't think it was, because that was my job as a parent and a teacher. Now, my dad did the same to me. He was a head of science, and so he'd always make me do my homework. But as an adult, he used to say, God, it was a nightmare when people did their homework because it just gave me more marking to do, and I never really looked at it, and it didn't help. And so I don't know. I see the benefit of independent learning, 100%. I'm just not sure that we're presenting the right things to be learning, if I'm honest.
Yeah. The research does, to a certain extent, back up the positive effect of homework on outcomes. I mean, the EEF reckons a positive impact of around 5 months on average, particularly with pupils in secondary schools. But I think, Darren, it also speaks to your points. It says that is the case when the homework is linked with classroom learning, and crucially when pupils know what it's supposed to be doing for them. And I think the families do come into that as well. So then you risk further advantaged children, you know, and improving the motivation further of already motivated children. And on that note, let's take the conversation forward again and talk a bit about unintended consequences and inclusion, which I know is one of your areas of responsibility, Katie, in your school. So let's have a think about the reality of how a requirement for work to be completed at home is going to hit different families in different circumstances. You know, we know that some children have a quiet room of their own with a desk in it and a table lamp and resources, and someone will come up halfway through and bring them a snack. Everything all set up for them to do their homework. Other kids, they're going to be fighting for space at the kitchen table. They might have caring responsibilities. They might have no decent internet connection. You've already said, Katie, that you try and mitigate for that kind of thing. Can you give me some examples of how you might do that?
I mean, firstly, I've got to echo what Darren said about those lovely, lovely projects.
It's homework for parents, isn't it?
We've all been on the end of one of those tasks, haven't we? And think, oh my goodness, how on earth am I going to resource that? But that's like a real living worry for lots of our parents in our community. And we're not talking just about having lollipop sticks and paint at home to be able to do those huge tasks. We're talking about the basics. We're talking about pens. We're talking about pencils. Some of my families, I've large families of 10 plus who are living in a 2-room property because, you know, the housing situation near our school is not fabulous. I think it's a responsibility, isn't it, as a school leader to really understand the context of your school and the lived experiences that your children and your families, you know, both live and breathe day in, day out. When you're kind of standing on your high horse in some respects and saying, why wasn't this done? Why wasn't that done? I don't understand how you can't do those things. I mean, we've moved to doing lots of our homework online. We brought that through from the pandemic, and we found that for the majority of our families that enables access. But we've got to be really mindful that some families may still struggle to access homework in that way. They might not have devices, they might not have internet access, they might not have electricity, you know, in the property that day. For me, it's everything about schools all comes back to relationships, doesn't it? And about our families' ability to be able to come and speak to us when they're finding things difficult. We enable that by being present, being out there and starting those conversations off, knowing our families really, really well. And for us, that kind of supports that access. We'll give homework in different ways. We'll send home resources that they might need. We'll do anything that we can to enable our children to be able to thrive in their home environment. I think the thing that we find, again, that we do really well at school is when we have lots of families that have that battle to do homework, and they'll talk quite a lot around that's the worst part of our week. You know, they won't come and sit down. It ends in tears. Everybody's crying. There's a big row. It impacts the evening. Again, we do a lot of work with our families there, and it's not about the homework, is it? It's about those instructions and children being able to follow and come and do what we ask them to do, whether that's reading or whether that's putting away a pile of socks or whether it's coming and sitting down to have our tea. So we do lots and lots of in-house, support strategies. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? We get groups of parents together where we can all talk about the things we're finding difficult and problem solve, collectively. And I think that you've just got to be really, really open to what the barriers might be and not blind to the fact that some things that you would perceive families should find easy. It's not the case, is it, in every household?
Yeah. See, that seems to me almost as if in the kinds of circumstances you're talking about there, homework is coming completely away from the academic then, and is more school sort of gently nudging around parenting and around easing relationships within the family and sort of supporting the family that way. Do you think that school does have a role to play in that sense, helping out with family dynamics?
Should we? We're an educational establishment, aren't we? That should be our primary goal. But that would be a completely naive viewpoint to have, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Relationships and parental engagement and family dynamics are absolutely everything. And without kind of getting that aspect of school right, I think certainly in a school like mine, we would struggle with everything else. That impacts on attendance, that impacts on behaviour, that impacts upon our ability to sit down and be ready to learn each day. So yeah, I mean, it's a can of worms, isn't it, this? You've got to put value there, and you've got to kind of understand the level of support that's needed and the demand for that as well.
We're trying to fill this secret meeting room with open cans and worms everywhere. Mm-hmm. This is what we like. Darren, do you think that homework can become a method by which schools are trying to instill particular values in children rather than keeping them up to date with their maths and their history and their geography and everything else? Do you think it can, and do you think it should become a way of teaching them about autonomy, responsibility, trust?
I tend to agree with Katie. I think we do, and we probably should by necessity rather than that being our primary aim. And I think this is where, when you get in secondary, I think the divide between youngsters massively changes. I think within primary, I think most parents would look back on their primary education and what they remember about it will be positive. They had good relationships generally with their class teacher. They'll have done some fun stuff. They'll have been on a nice trip. It'll be the first time they've done lots of things. For lots of young people, it'll be the first time they've done a residential with their friends. It might be the first time they went to the beach or a museum or anything like those things. When we get to secondary, parents, I think, are very divided in that some parents, I think like all of us, will have probably had a fairly positive experience at school and it's done as well. And I think all of us can sit here and think that we know that doing those things we're supposed to do, working, maybe a bit of homework and so on, has been productive for us. A lot of the families that I've interacted with, certainly in areas that you would say are high in terms of deprivation, is those parents, for whatever reason, haven't seen school as positively as we do. And therefore, when we try and instill those same values or beliefs or methodology, they don't believe it themselves. So when we're trying to say, it's really important you do this, it's be really good for your future, those parents don't necessarily believe us. And we're never going to win in that situation. And I think, again, it depends on the subject. As a maths teacher, when I've hit my head against a brick wall with parents not supporting it, it's not because they don't think it's important. They just can't do it, and they completely understand why their kids can't do it, and they'll never be able to do it, and so on. Whereas other subjects, when I've had issues sort of as a senior leader with parents, it's been, well, it doesn't matter, it's not important. Geography, who cares about geography? Who cares about RS? All those kind of things where you're trying to instill that idea that actually we live in a world rightly or wrongly, where 5 GCSEs with English and maths is really important, and the big wide worlds for A-levels, for degrees and so on, often don't care what those GCSEs are. So it's about making sure that you treat all of your subjects with equal importance. But parents in many cases don't believe that. They don't go along it. And I think they're far more vocal about that when it's secondary. And also we don't have, generally in state education, we don't have that relationship that Katie talks about that's so important. And when I worked in the independent sector, I worked abroad, and I worked in a large independent school that went from nursery right through to sixth form. And I would have daily conversations at the front door with my sixth form parents, who were absolutely invested in their kids' education. Now, I know partly because they were paying for it, but it wasn't just that. It was they genuinely were invested in it, and they had experienced themselves the benefit of working hard at school. So they'd done well, they'd got good jobs, they were earning good money, and they were investing lots of that money back in their children's education. So they saw the positive cycle there. But we unfortunately live in a society where not everyone's the same like that. And we have lots of families that are struggling, in many cases not through any fault of their own, but they don't necessarily value education in the way we'd like them to, because they don't feel it's been transformative in any way for them. And that's really hard. And I think homework is just yet another of those barriers that we then put up, where they're saying, well, what's the point?
I can completely see that, especially when, and obviously this is not the case in your school, Katie, or in any of the schools that you've worked in, Darren, but as a parent whose children are now at university, over the years, I've certainly seen the whole range of different types of homework that can be sent home, from really, quite thoughtful writing tasks, which were an extension of something that they've been talking about in a topic in primary school, and it sort of culminated in an independent writing task that they're going to do at home, to various badly photocopied worksheets that have been printed off some website. I remember once my children were sent home with a maths task, which was to do with, it used a series of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. And one of the questions was, how many of the people doing X were men and how many were women? And you needed to know that in that particular series of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, Fran was a man. And there were 2 other names which were similarly androgynous. And I looked, and that series of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here had gone out before my children had been born. And when a parent is faced with something like that as a task that they're supposed to give up precious family time to do, you can kind of tell why they don't really see the point of it. So I do think it's important, if schools are going to be sending homework home, that it has to be clear why it's being set and what it's for. On the flip side of that, I am also aware that as well as these parents, we're desperately trying to engage and demonstrate the importance of education to them, there is also another swathe of parents who, if the maths homework and the English homework and the spellings didn't come home every single week and get marked and get put in some sort of logbook, they would hit the roof. Is that familiar, Katie?
Not for me from a career point of view. I've always worked in schools that are the opposite, I would say. However, as a parent, I would say more so. Those parents' WhatsApp group can go, can't they? When there's a mistake in the homework or something hasn't come home. I find that really difficult, because I always see it from the teacher's side of what could have happened that day, and never ever comment. But no, that's unfortunately not something, or fortunately should I say, not something that I've come across.
What about you, Darren? Do you see that sort of divide between the parents who there's never enough homework and the parents for whom there's always too much?
Yeah, I mean, in my career, I think I've been in a number of different settings, shall we say, and certainly the one abroad working in independent sector, absolutely. Compounded by the fact that lots of the parents were academically very bright. A lot of them worked at the local university, and they would come home, particularly with my year 11s and year 12 and 13s, and actually challenge some of the things that are in the homework or the methods that were being used. And I remember, as a maths teacher, one parent having a conversation with me about how we should solve this particular pure maths problem. And I looked at it, I had no idea what he was talking about. This man was on a level of maths that was so far above what I knew. So yeah, that was one of those, get me out of here situations, because the real challenge. I mean, it's nice in a way, because you do want that parental support. But I think, as you alluded to earlier, all it does is it just widens that divide. It just shows that the idea of decreasing this gap between those that can and do, or those that have and those that have not, it is so complex, because they will eat it up. And it's not just the parents as well. Some of the students will. I've had students in the past that will just endlessly ask for more work and more work and more work. And they just gobble it up, and they're really, they enjoy it and so on. So yeah, it is a real challenge. I think parents have a responsibility as well to just calm down a bit. And I have said that in a nice way to some parents about, your children do need some downtime. But the reality in life, Katie said how busy she was as a youngster. I was the same. I sport endlessly, lots of other things going on. And I think nowadays, if you look at some of the really high achieving youngsters that we have, they do everything. They play instruments to grade 7. They play sport, county and above, and they're really good at their academic subjects. I don't know where it starts. I don't even know if it's primary or even maybe before school, but there is just such a divide that we kind of feed through this because we believe we have, parents are the biggest challenge with homework, negative and positive, definitely. Yeah, gosh, you made me thought there. You made me think there now.
I didn't mean to bring things down. And of course, as well as the high achievers with their sport and their instruments and everything else, let's not forget there's the other thing that is competing for all of our children's time and the parents' time at the moment. And we know that is screens and that is the algorithm feed. It's a lot to combat. But as you said earlier on, Darren, whether we like it or not, getting those GCSE results is really, really important for children's life chances as things are set up at the moment. That's the bar that we have decided as a society to set, and so schools obviously are trying to support children to achieve that. And as those exams get closer, the ultimate homework, if you will, has got to be revision, right? And that is something that you can't do for them. You can't dodge it. You can't get around. And if we don't use homework to give them the skills they'll need for that, then where are they going to get them from? Do you think that's a fair point? Either of you jump in on that.
No, absolutely, I do. And those students that revise tend to be the ones that right through their school life have had some kind of organisation around their study, going home and reading through their notes. What do they say? They say you learn very little from being taught it. You learn a bit more from reading through it yourself. You learn even more from showing somebody else. So the idea of youngsters going home and sharing their homework with brother or sister or parents or whatever is really valuable. But I don't think we're getting through to that group of students who maybe academically don't do as well as we'd like to, for not just that reason, a whole host of reasons, but because they haven't got those skills in place early on. You're absolutely right. So I think ultimately, I'm not saying that I don't think students should do stuff at home. I think they should. I just think we need to be careful about what it is and why we're doing it, and also acknowledge that those group of students. I teach an FE at the moment, and there's a whole load of students that are obviously resitting maths for God knows how many times, and they really struggle with it. And the reason they struggle with it is not what they're doing now, it's what they didn't do 10 years ago.
I'd say maybe that's our goal, isn't it, as educators across kind of the age range. I would be really interested in if there was any research about this. Is outcomes in terms of success with revision and willingness to revise and ability to have those independent learning skills to revise when you reach end of high school, when you reach FE. Can we build those skills kind of like gradually, from primary school age? Is our own role in primary schools about developing that independent love of learning, which then enables children to have the skills and the confidence to apply themselves kind of more academically and in deeper revision and deeper homework when they get to that high school age range? I don't know. It's an interesting question, isn't it, that one?
It is. I'd like to think it's one of those things that your instinct is to say, well, that's not something that you can teach. You've either got an intrinsically motivated child or you haven't, but you're shaking your head, Katie. And I think you're right. I think you absolutely can teach this. Children's brains are very plastic. We know this, especially in the early years, but also in that key stage 3 kind of state. So yeah, I'd like to think that we can develop those independent learning skills. One of the ranges of home learning that my children had when they were at secondary school, they were at a school that really did prize the idea of independent learning. And homework for the first 3 or 4 years for them, they had very long lessons. They had 3 subjects a day, and each subject, the expectation was that they would go home and continue their exploration of that subject for 20 minutes for each subject each day. And that time period was increased over the years. And it was great in theory. but actually they needed a little more guidance than, go and read around the subject a bit more, because that's actually a skill you don't pick up until much later, I think. Or if you have an absolute passion for the subject. It's all very interesting, but I'm aware that we are running out of time in our secret meeting room. And one of the things I do need to ask of you is to pass a verdict on this rule. And I'm going to be kind. I'm going to allow a certain amount of fence sitting, should you require it. So I'm going to ask each of you in turn whether the rule, homework must be handed in on time and everything that implies, whether it should be kept, whether it should be thrown on the scrap heap, or whether it just needs a darn good rethink. And I've come to you first almost every time, Katie, so I'm going to jump on Darren and come to you first and ask for your verdict.
I think home learning and independent learning is really valuable, absolutely. But I think we need to rethink what we're doing. I think if I was to go back into running a school now, I would look at homework in terms of experiential learning and say, I'm going to set family a homework, not the child, the family. I'm going to make sure that over the course of a year, and we can help fund this if we need to, but they've all been to a sporting event. They've all been to the theatre. They've all been to a museum. They've all been to a place of some significant historical history. They've all been to a castle. They've all been to a stately home. Just something that allows them to think where it takes you. Because I think that's what we're missing is the why. Is, right, I understand this homework. I understand you're telling me I need to do it, but I don't understand why. I don't understand where it's going to get me. It's not inspiring me in any way. And I think we need to get right back to the bones of what education is about, which isn't just about the learning. It's about inspiration. And we talk all the time about our lifelong learning. We do it in FE all the time. And it's meaningless. It doesn't really mean that at all. It just means we want you to conduct some kind of education through your life. And that's not what lifelong learning means. Life learning is about a passion for something that you come across in life that you think, I want to know more about this. I'm going to watch some TV programs about it or read a book or go somewhere. And so I think we need to just not get rid of homework, but just completely change what it's about and what it's for.
I love that. Okay, Katie.
Oh, I love all of that as well, Darren. I think that's a really, really, really good ambition to have. I think that by the time we have done lots of work with our children, we should expect that they can complete a task on time. However, it depends what the task is. It needs to have purpose. It needs to be bespoke for them. It needs to have additional layering if they find it too hard, too easy. And what's going to have come before that is a school that have worked really hard to understand the barriers to that task being completed and has put that groundwork in. And I think if we can do that as educators, then we're setting our children up for the future, because the future does have deadlines. Work has deadlines. Children need to have that ability to be responsible and do what is asked of them. But there's a whole journey to go through before we get there. And I think we've got to not remember those really, really important stepping stones that children need to have been through to enable them to be able to ultimately achieve that goal of doing this when you're asked to by this date. And I think that that's a really important skill to have. But like I say, it needs lots and lots of guidance at multiple levels.
I love that too. As ever, this has been an absolutely brilliant conversation, and it's raised as many questions as we've answered, which I'm just going to go away and turn over in my head, and we'll probably come up with lots more episodes based on that. But yeah, loads to think about, loads of brilliant insights, and lucky students to be taught by both of you, frankly. You're both doing amazing things. So yeah, perhaps the real question isn't whether homework should be handed in on time, but what we ultimately want homework to leave children feeling about themselves and about their learning. We want them to feel capable, motivated, and ready to learn independently, not anxious about missing a deadline or not being able to do something on their own. Yeah, so thank you both once again, Katie and Darren, for your time and your thoughts. And thank you everyone out there for listening. I will be back soon with another episode of No Running in the Corridors, where we'll be putting another familiar school rule under the microscope. And if you have an idea for a rule that you think we should look at, please do get in touch and let us know. The contact details are in the episode notes. Until next time then, keep questioning, keep learning, and remember, no running in the corridors.